The following is a production of New Mexico State University.
Our pleasure to be rejoined at the Domenici conference by Dr. Mike Martin, the Chancellor of Louisiana State University and former president here. We've been rejoined by Dr. Pacheco, our interim president of New Mexico State University. And I was delighted to see Dr. John Counts here somewhere. John, did you just walk in? I thought I saw you walk in. Oh, back here, president of Western New Mexico University, long-serving president of Western New Mexico University. I'm guessing 10 or 12 years, or how long, John? 16 years. 17 years. You ought to write a book about how you managed to do that, because that's really going against the trends anymore. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday's conference. I thought it was just outstanding. I learned more about, thank you. I learned a lot about nuclear energy and the prospects of nuclear power in the future, and I thought Secretary Napolitano did an outstanding job discussing border issues yesterday, and we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. I also have another person, Dr. Jim Tegnalia, who's here, back here, who used to be the director of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and so I guess he came here to help minimize the threats, yeah. And he's back here with Chairman McCorkle, who's been on the Domenici Legacy Committee for a long period of time. It is my pleasure to introduce to you, if I can find him, where'd he go? He's right over here. Regent Curtis, who is over there talking to the next speaker, but Regent Curtis is a longtime friend of mine, Blake. I got acquainted with Blake many, many years ago. At one time when I had political aspirations, he jumped in and helped me out. Flies a lot of different kinds of airplanes, flew me around the state. And along the way, somehow he became infected with this political bug and actually ran for office himself and served as a state legislator for a number of years, an outstanding state legislator, and then decided there was more to life than politics and went back to the family business and his family, and I admire him very much for that. And I'd like to now call up Regent Blake Curtis, who's the president of the New Mexico Board of Regents, to introduce our first program. Blake.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to New Mexico State University this morning. I'm naive enough to think that this is the finest university in the state of New Mexico. There are others, but today I want to encourage you to join me in congratulating all of the people who work here and all their great successes, including fantastic enrollment numbers, I understand, soon to be announced. Good morning, Senator, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conference. Our next speaker is a very qualified and talented individual. David Najera is a career diplomat and member of the Mexican Foreign Service since 1990 and currently holds the rank of Minister Counselor. He holds a degree in Business Administration from Universidad Iberoamericana, a master's degree in Asia and Africa from El Colegio de Mexico, and a BA in Intelligence for National Security from the Mexican Center for Investigation and National Security. He's also graduated from a course for high-level officials at the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies in Washington, D.C. Since July of 2007, he's the Deputy Director General for Special Affairs at the Undersecretariat for North American Affairs at the Mexican Secretariat of Foreign Affairs, participating directly in the Merida Initiative process and other security projects. He was in charge of the SFA regional office in Merida, Yucatan, and has served at the embassies of Mexico in Belgium, Luxembourg, European Union, Israel, and Canada. In the academic field, he's developed an intense academic activity, teaching, researching, and lecturing. He's been an instructor at the Mexican Naval Studies Center, at the National Defense College, and at CSUN. Professor at El Colegio de Mexico, Universidad Iberoamericana, and Universidad de Americas. Lecturer at several universities and security institutions. He's also collaborated in 6 collective books and in several academic publications, especially in topics related to Islam, Palestine security, and international migrations, and the Gulf War. He's been Secretary of the Association of Asian and African Studies at El Colegio de Mexico. He's a member of the Mexican Association of Foreign Affairs Studies, the Foreign Affairs Service Association, the Analysis Group of Security with Democracy, and the Canadian Institute for Strategic Studies. He's collaborated with Professor Thiago Sintra at the Latin American Center for Strategic Studies. Now, if that doesn't qualify him enough, he's also a parent. He's a parent of a 10-year-old daughter. His wife is also a diplomat in foreign ministry, and he teaches 2 nights a week at a couple of colleges, I understand. Goodness gracious, he has no spare time. He can't. His hobbies are studying international affairs and the extra time he gets to spend with his daughter. Help me welcome our uniquely qualified next speaker, Minister, Counselor David Najera.
Morning. Thank you so much. Thank you for your invitation and your kind words, Mr. Cortes. I think that I have a long presentation, which is the trademark, but I will try much more to talk and be following with the slides on the walls, because yesterday night Mrs. Napolitano provided us a great overview of what's going on the Mexico-United States bilateral relations, especially on the border. Coming from Mexico City, being a Chilango, I don't have. This is not a very good presentation from myself. So what do I have coming from the capitals to talk with you about the border that you don't know and understand much better than myself about the border? So I will try to provide a view from a political perspective, trying to build a more strong relationship on the area. And please, I ask you to forgive me if I make too many mistakes on the understanding of the truly daily life on the border. It is a special pleasure to be in Las Cruces, to attend this conference. And first of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Senator Domenici for this initiative and the spirit that provides to all this gathering. When he invited the Secretary of Foreign Relations, Ambassador Espinosa was quite interested to assist with a very tight schedule. She asked to Ambassador Benito Andion, who's my current boss, to be here, and then my current boss asked me to be here, which is a really opportunity for me, which reflects how intensive is our daily work. So that's why we moved the presentation from Benito Andion to myself. As you know, the features of our shared border make it a cornerstone on the bilateral agenda. Over the past year, it has become a center of attention among public opinion in our societies. There is a rapidly growing area which sets the tone of the bilateral relationship. We should look to the border for opportunities to promote cooperation between our countries. Mexico believes that the true and final goal of securing the border is contingent upon improving its governance and boosting development to achieve well-being for the citizens living both sides of it. Mexico stands as a purposeful quest towards a secure region and sound cooperation that aims at development, governance, and democracy. I would like to share with you some facts that reflect this reality, facts that you know every day. The border is home to around 14 million people with an estimated 7 million living on each side of it. The 6 Mexican border states and the 4 U.S. counterparts account for roughly a quarter of the respective countries' GDP. Together, the 10 border states represent the 5th largest economy in the world. It is the most frequently crossed international border in the world, with about 350 million legal crossings every year, almost 1 million per year. 300,000 vehicles cross the border daily. I'm just talking legally. Currently, the border hosts 52 ports of entry, 14 crossings, 32 bridges, and there are 26 new projects going on. Of the more than $300 billion in trade between the United States and Mexico, about 85% cross the border by land. Mexico is the United States' third largest trading partner and his second export destination. Mexico accounts for 11.5% of U.S. trade and receives almost 13% of its exports. Several U.S. states depend heavily on Mexico as an export market. Texas, 36%, Arizona, 29%, Nebraska, 22%, and California, 15%. Actually, trade has increased more than 3 times since NAFTA was enacted in 1994. U.S.-Mexico trade totaled $300 billion in 2007, and more than $24 billion in remittances is sent to Mexico every year from the United States, roughly 3% of Mexico's gross domestic product. For 22 states in the USA, Mexico has become either the first or the second export destination, stressing the fact that trade with Mexico is increasingly important to significant sectors of U.S. economy. I'm making all this data, all these figures, the most part of them you already know them, or work on them, or participate directly on all these questions. But it's amazing how few of these data is known both inside the United States and inside Mexico. You're living here, you're the people on both sides of the border who understand much, much better the dynamic of the bilateral relation. This is something that is not clearly understood both in DC or in Mexico City. And it's amazing. So I'm telling you things that you already know, but I just want to stress that fact. Let me see if the presentation goes with what I'm trying to do, which is to show that the realities of the border, the ones that you have been building for many years, are really changing the face of the bilateral relation. And this is something that we have to stress on the political relation and not just seeing as a regional phenomena between the trade or the problems going on the border. More and more people are really believing that what's going on in Mexico and the United States relation is really changing the face, especially what's happening in the border, is really changing the face of the future of the bilateral relation. The rise of U.S.-Mexico transnationalism is nowadays self-apparent, comprising the movement of people, ideas, and practices across the increasingly permeable border and the existence of transnational communities on both sides of it. Between the United States and Mexico, politics is becoming a cross-border phenomenon. If all politics is local, the local is also often transnational. Managing the border between the U.S. and Mexico is not an easy task. Featuring a 2,000-mile lane, the number of agencies dealing with border issues on the U.S. alone is outstanding. These agencies often have overlapping jurisdiction and tasks, meaning that bureaucratic competition and infighting are inevitably present in border management. The problem of collaboration between law enforcement officials at national, regional, and international levels is not a simple one. Even at national and subnational levels, a strong competition among agencies can arise. Individuals and law enforcement agencies engage in turf wars to get the credit for successful investigations, as an example. Nonetheless, the government of Mexico is glad to say that we are currently working very closely with several U.S. agencies to solve these kind of issues before they become problems. The Merida Initiative, that I will explain later, gives us a good example of how cooperation between our two countries can overcome all obstacles and become efficient in the fight against organized crime, drug traffickers, and smugglers. What I want to say here is that we can see from a certain historical perspective, and especially in terms of security issues, a bilateral relation that passed for nice times and bad times. The nice times are times of cooperation, of understanding, and the bad times are very good times for the mafia, for the mob, for the gangs. are exactly the times where the violence starts to grow, where drug traffickers or any kind of traffickers extend their capabilities and their power. So every time there are differences between politicians, there are differences between the executive, the only people that pay the price are basically the people and the region of the border. Those are where the bad effects happens. So we can just help me to remember in '85, a DEA agent in Jalisco, in Guadalajara, was killed by a cartel. The reaction from the US government was to put a lot of pressure on the Mexican one, a lot of corruption on the agents against drugs in Mexico were helping the cartel, and we start to blame each other. We blame the United States because you consume the drugs, because you're asking for the drugs, and you were blaming us because we pass all the drugs and we're envenenando. We were putting all the drugs on the young people of the United States. So this absence of dialogue only helps to the market, to the legal market. That's the only result. When the United States imposed the called certificación, the annual certification of which countries were cooperating in the war against the drugs, it became an individual perspective from the United States about the drug wars. So it not certificate Mexico, or it not certificate Colombia, or it not certificate exactly the countries that were producing or passing, trafficking the drugs. The result was the absence of dialogue, the absence of cooperation, and the continuous perception that the United States were seeing from one side the problem, which was not the perspective of the other countries. And I think this has changed. It has changed for several questions on recent years. It started to change on the times of President Bush, even since President Clinton, when we start to work, seeing that the certification was with a lot of support still in the Congress. Both executives start to work during the Clinton years, working on multilateral agenda, trying to build a perspective of the drug problem as a world problem and not just a bilateral or a local question. During the Bush administration, the certification ended and it changed to a different kind of report. So it starts to open the doors for a more strong cooperation between both countries. And during those years where you were so involved in the war against terrorism, the people working on drug questions, especially on the border, keep working very hard with the Mexican counterpart. Problems as corruption has been always there on the Mexican side, and we think that not only on the Mexican side, because the drug passed, and then something happened on the other side. No? What we have is that while the top officials cannot talk clearly about these problems, the people working daily on this were really working on that. And this starts to build questions of confidence in very small groups, but very specific targets. And that during the Fox administration in Mexico, during the 2000-2006 administration in Mexico, the government provides a good results in terms of catching high-level leaders on the cartels. But that's the explanation. To have in jail these leaders open the possibility for a new generation of gang members to become the leaders of those cartels. So you have the top leaders who has become leaders after many years, that probably started as petty gang members and then clean to build a kind of empire. Once they're in jail, the second in command were generally a new generation of young people, probably graduated, making the administration of a business. And then there came like an army, the third level. Those people were the ones that killed first the second layer of of the gang administration, and with a different, absolutely different perspective of the business, with no intellectual resources, but with our heavily weapons capability. So that has fueled the war we're seeing right now. We've seen the killings and the massacres of people who doesn't think that their business is just to traffic drugs. The things that their business is to keep power, to control, which was not the perspective of the former generations of the cartel leaders. So this is a step back in terms of business on organized crime, and this is what we see now. To be fighting this, and almost at the end of the Bush administration, once I think that he started to put attention also to what's going on Mexico and the growing violence that appears, as we're seeing in 2005, more or less, it starts to grow, the numbers of the killings in Mexico. What we see now, and I would like I will try to explain later, is a new momentum, because there are political understanding on both sides, and that provides the political coverage and support for actions on all the organization. At the same time, on all the structure. At the same time, we have these people, agents on both sides, on different US agencies and Mexican agencies, working together for many years. So there are some basic level of trust and confidence on both sides, and also the political push to go on that direction. And this is what is changing and seeing, at least for the moment, a nice time in terms of cooperation. So it shows also why there are so many violence, because there are much more actions on both sides against this question. As you know, no other part of Mexico or the United States has suffered the consequences of the terrorist attack of September 11 as a border region. The transition from a pre-NAFTA border to a 21st century intelligent border required us to strike a balance between security and the efficient flow of goods and people. That's development. Indeed, as many people on both sides of the border say, more bridges and fewer walls are needed. The border economy reflects the way we complement and the advantage we can offer to each other. Furthermore, every day we face challenges that call for a comprehensive collaboration between the two countries to foster progress opportunities and become more efficient. The recent health crisis showed a renewed spirit of cooperation that exists between our nation to fight against common enemies. Well, the mention of that I have already shown it. Last March, during their bilateral meeting in Mexico City, the President of Mexico and the United States resumed the dialogue on promoting a strategic partnership between our countries. Presidents Calderon and Obama will deal with bilateral cooperation in competitiveness and economic development, environment, migration, social well-being, and security. Indeed, there are already strategic alliances between our governments to cope with common problems that we must solve together, such as security. I think that the safer Mexico is, the safer the United States will also be. President Obama has underscored his interest in finding ways to work together to reduce drug-related violence. He has praised the steps that the Mexican government has taken to improve security in Mexico and expressed his ongoing support for the valuable work being done under the Merida Initiative. The U.S. government is responding to the range of threats along the border with Mexico in several ways. The Border Patrol grew to more than 18,000 agents by the end of 2008, but the challenge it faces are more and more related with organized crime. Both countries are working on different paths to strengthen border cooperation within the framework of existing mechanism that was created during one of those nice times at the end of the 90s and survived the differences. One is, this is much more recently, but it's a show of that. It's called the OASIS program, which is Operation Against Smugglers Initiative on Safety and Security, which is, we have managed a little bit more than 900 cases on this program since 2005, where smugglers are caught in the United States and passed to Mexico, but with evidences and declarations. So we use those declarations to put them in jail and really to create a case. One of the problems in the border is that there are so many people illegally crossing or making the smuggling of these people, or illegally or crossing drugs, that there are not enough jails. And it's very expensive and it takes too long. So when the public officials try to explain to the public that they have to spend a lot of money because they need at least 2 years to keep these people in jail and then to create a case, then it's not a very good business for public money. So what we're making for the moment in the smuggling and in the future in other questions related with crimes in the border is the United States is catching the people and providing the elements to sustain the case in Mexican courts. And as I said, since 2005, that OASIS program started, we have proceeded with a little bit more than 900 people. We have only lost 3 cases. And that shows how effective is the program and how effective is the cooperation, because the basis of this cooperation is between local, state, and federal agents working on both sides and passing the people, and making the cases. Unfortunately, there are not people from DC or from Mexico City working on the program. So the program works on a specific basis on each one of the regions. So the people of Nogales or the people in El Paso, or each one are making their cases and not working all along the border. So there are a lot of autonomy on decision and a lot of capabilities of on-site to take the decisions to proceed. Secretary Napolitano mentioned yesterday night the Border Enforcement and Security Task Forces, or BEST program, which is to create specifically units between different levels of authority on both sides, working together and coordinating for different actions against organized crime. This is not possible if there are not the political atmosphere to push for that, and if there are not the enough trust between the people that are dealing daily with the problems. The U.S.-Mexico Action Plans for Cooperation and Border Safety from 2004 and the Action Plans to Combat Border Violence and Improve Public Safety through the expansion of its protocols along the border. Likewise, there are different bilateral forums such as the Mexico-U.S. Senior Law Enforcement Plenary. The SLEP was created in 1998 and has survived to all these different political change. And there are working groups which are law enforcement and counter-narcotics, arms trafficking, chemical controls, interdiction, organized migrant smuggling and trafficking in person, asset forfeiture and money laundering, fugitives and mutual legal assistance, intellectual property, and cybercrime, shows a very extensive and complex agenda just in questions related with crime. There are groups that works much more, with better results than other. Every year we reunite to talk about and to discuss of the result of each one of these groups, and that's for the photo, no? That's for the proceedings. But the daily work is what it is important on all the SLEP structure. And many parts of these SLEP structures coming from the United States has been the base for the new programs created under the Merida Initiative. As cartels battle the Mexican, on the order, there are not a clear order between my presentation and the slides, but so it will be an aide-memoire to helping us. So we talk about this, that those are where the crossings are established on the border. Many of you probably use this Sentry program that is designed to help to make the daily traffic crossing the border much more easy, especially with a trade perspective. This is very difficult to see. As cartels battle the Mexican government and one another, there has been a significant increase in violence within Mexico, underscoring the need of joint action involving local, federal, and even military forces to campaign against organized crime. In this regard, I will quickly refer, since later on a detailed lecture on this issue I think will be delivered, I will refer, to the Operativo Conjunto Chihuahua, or Chihuahua Joint Operation, whose objective has been to dismantle criminal networks in the area of Puerto Palomas, Chihuahua, and Columbus, New Mexico, in the area of Juarez, El Paso. It involves the deployment of troops, Air Force, and federal policemen to carry out scouting missions in rural and urban areas. This operation has led to the arrest of alleged drug trafficker seizure, and we have seen not a significant decrease in the surge of violence within the region. I would like to stress once again that joining effort is the best way to address the problems on our border through a shared responsibility approach. During previous years, both countries have been working to tackle the common problem of organized crime, terrorism, and drug trafficking, which is also an international one. Against this background, building trust in the region between public authorities and law enforcement agencies in the two countries is not an easy task. Democratic security governance calls for the ways and means of accountability to be paired with the realities of evolving forms of border management. If they are to be effective and legitimate, addressing this problem effectively will require substantial economic resources and political capital, but given the stakes, the investment is a necessary one. Think that the Mexican army is around 200,000 personnel, and 45,000 of them are daily involved on different operations against drug trafficking. That's a comparative with what's going on in Afghanistan. Of course, there is a clear difference. We're not fighting against local people, native, and with an organized or semi-organized army. So that's a clear difference. When we take out the army to the streets, the Mexican constitutions provide the legal framework for the Army and the Navy to provide assistance to police forces, assistance, not to affect directly or to be the police, but there are a legal sustain to be helping the police. When we put the Army on the streets, was related with how corrupt was the local police and how weak was the federal police. We have less than it was like 14,000 people personnel on the federal police, which was not enough for. We're acting right now on more or less the same level as Chihuahua, in Sinaloa, in Tijuana, and Michoacan. So there are not a lot of people to be putting on these programs, and our army is not. They can patrol as an army, but they cannot be making really work as police. Since yesterday, the army starts to retire from the streets on Chihuahua, on Juarez, and a new generation of both, a new force of 2,000 people of new local police of Ciudad Juarez, and around 1,500 of new federal police agents has been sent to Juarez. So they're going to be they're replacing the army on the streets. It has taken several months to prepare these people, and it takes several months to recognize that we have to change all the local police. We're receiving a lot of assistance, not just from the United States, also from other countries, to organize these new forces. That doesn't mean that the new police will be a result immediately. This is, there's someone in Mexico that said, it's like if you have a jar with the dirty water and you just put new water, clean water on it, it will take several times to really have clear water before you can really drink on it. And this is something we're going to see. That demands time. But that time is a time that the society doesn't have. It's a time that the people that are skilled every day doesn't have. So it's not easy for the politicians to try to explain that we're winning this war. This is something nobody's going to believe you. So I won't say that. I won't say that we're winning anything. We're just working. In the past, bilateral cooperation on the issues of security and drug trafficking has abided to specific rules and procedures where the two countries have come together. The Agreement on Cooperation in Combating Narcotics Trafficking and Drug Dependency, signed in 1989, is the formal framework enabling cooperation between Mexico and the U.S. However, the fight against organized crimes stems from these consequences for our own security rather than from legally binding agreements. A clear example of this new cooperation effort is the Merida Initiative, a mechanism founded upon the principles of shared responsibility, mutual trust, and respect to each other, to each country's sovereign jurisdiction. The Merida Initiative aims to mend the situation by providing to the Mexican government the tools to take the offensive of this fight against drug traffickers. It emphasized interdiction, enforcement, and security measures, with domestic treatment and prevention programs, source country economic development projects, and other alternative strategies that until now had been considered less important. What is the change, if there are really a change between this program and other strategies before? What we've been talking and working with the United States authorities is that we don't want assistance. And I'm using the word assistance as you use it in English, because what we want to talk is about cooperation. What you have, once you approve on the budget every year in terms of a relation with other countries, you approve it in terms of assistance, which is asistencia for us, which is aid. And what we want is cooperation. And what we are asking to the United States is cooperation in terms of responsibility. I mean, it's not just a question of we're letting the Colombian cocaine to pass and cross to Mexico and arrive to the United States, so we're the bad guys. What are you doing in your country about this problem? I just saw this morning on the newspaper a comment about the percentage of dollar bills from a certain amount of bills that has remains of cocaine on it. That means that has been used to inhale the cocaine. And in 2007 was 60%, and in 2009 they are 90%. That shows a problem which is, of course, not only here. What's happened in Mexico for many years for us was very comfortable just to be saying that the United States were using the drugs, that we're clean, we just let him pass. No. Well, in the 90s, once, if you remember Miami Vice, and you remember this idea of Miami in the 80s, well, once, especially the Coast Guard, closed the routes of the Caribbean for the Colombian cocaine, the Colombian cartels start to use the Pacific to make these cocaines arrivals to the United States, and they start to use Mexico. On those years already, Mexico was a huge, probably the first marijuana producer and the first trafficker to the United States. So these Colombian cartels used the Mexican routes to cross to the United States, and was very easy. So, and these Mexicans became very successful on this business because they have their own ways, their own links, their own networks on the United States to deliver those drugs. So they were delivering it in the 90s so fast that the Colombians had not enough time to recover that in money. So they start to pay it with arms and cocaine. So there were not a cocaine problem in Mexico then, and now there is a cocaine problem in Mexico. Because a huge part of those drugs embarks were paid with drug. So Mexico, who doesn't produce cocaine, where the cocaine was very expensive during the 80s and 90s, is an easy drug to find now on the Mexican streets. So this is a problem that we cannot keep seeing just as we have a problem with the United States because they demand a lot. We start to have a drug problem in Mexico. We have to face it not just with a police perspective, which has been the basic perspective on the war against the drugs for many years. We have to face a health problem and not just a police one. Try to explain that to someone that is receiving a lot of money. For example, and I'm talking about politicians again. CONADIC, which is the Mexican authority for a health perspective on drug addictions, is receiving, on the first years of the Merida Initiative, $10 million, while the security ministry is receiving around $250 million. That's clear. Where is the perception and the perspective of where we have to fight it? This is something that has to change in the future. If really the fight against wars is a successful one, as we said constantly, from this police perspective, then we have to start to change in the next future to provide more resources and much more attendance to questions of legal framework, consolidation of the judiciary, and especially to attend a health perspective. If we really want to make a change on this war. The initiative, let me find something about well, we talk about this. I will let the presentation so the information will be available for you. Let me go, I'll back later to migration better. Let me go directly to the questions of the Merida Initiative. The initiative likely envisions a long-lasting U.S. commitment to counter narcotics programs in Mexico. In this sense, U.S. and Mexican officials have referred to the program as reflecting a new paradigm in bilateral security relations, exactly for the question of cooperation and not just an assistance one. And the Merida Initiative may indeed constitute a new paradigm in U.S.-Mexican affairs, but it also symbolizes an old paradigm in U.S. counter-narcotics policy. With its emphasis on interdiction and enforcement initiatives, the Merida Initiative is the latest incarnation of a long-standing supply-side approach to drug trade. That's what I'm saying, that the next steps on Merida Initiative will almost securely change to a different approach. Through equipment and training provided by the U.S. government to Mexico, law enforcement agencies are tackling the fight against drugs cartels from the outside and corruption from the inside of the institutions. Human rights are also a priority in the initiative, and training is provided to several of the Mexican agencies participating in Merida. One of the main purposes of the Merida Initiative is to develop a joint strategy for our borders, including Mexico's southern one. Central America is part of this initiative too, and these countries of Central America are included in the plan. Arms trafficking is a priority of both governments because it is usually tied with bulk cash and precursor chemicals being smuggled from the U.S. to Mexico. The funding provided by Merida will help build a stronger strategy to halt the illegal traffic crossing our borders every day. A specialized work group was created, and they'll have 2 meetings in terms of arms trafficking, to evaluate the situation in both borders, one in Tapachula and one in Phoenix the next week. Concerning the issue of weapons trafficking, it is self-evident that we face a huge contrast between the legal frameworks regulating weapons ownership in the US and Mexico. Domestic reasons have led each country to hold completely different stance on the matter, and in spite of mutual respect to each other's sovereignty, it is not infrequent that being unacquainted with this difference leads to disagreement and frictions. Criminal organizations have at their disposal enough money and supporting networks to acquire the weapons they need to fare in a context of escalating violence. Furthermore, the trade-off between weapons and drugs has become a payment method in the context of drug trafficking. Our neighborhood with the US, the ease of weapon ownership, and the fact that the broad spectrum of illegal trade facilitates the exchange of drugs, weapons, and people, generates a fertile soil for illegal trafficking bound for Mexico. All this makes clear that weapons trafficking has become a cornerstone of transnational organized crime in North America due to prevailing conditions. It is because of this that the government of Mexico deems that restricting the trade on assault weapons and a tighter regulation of gun shows is a measure that needs to be implemented, being a feasible step that could be taken with full respect to the rights of your citizens and that will bring increased security for our societies and disrupting corruption both sides of the border. Just want to comment on that. The question of the assault weapons mark a clear difference and advantage for the organized crimes especially against the local forces. The kind of weapons that our local forces use has nothing to do with the capabilities of these cartels. So that's one of the reasons why the army has been on the streets and why we have to provide a trust and confident new police forces to use those kinds of weapons. Because we don't want to be fighting with our army, with a corruption police, with new arms and new capabilities. So it really faces a challenge, and it has taken several months, at least on Juarez. I don't want to bore you with numbers, but please allow me to outline some significant actions undertaken by Mexico during this administration. You understand? I have to say that. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm here. More than $310 million have been seized in cash. This administration started in December 2006, so that's on the last 2 years and a half. More than $310 million in cash has been seized. 90 tons of cocaine and 4,000 tons of marijuana, equivalent to 3,000 millions of individual doses, have also been seized. 21,440 handguns and 26,031 long firearms have been secured. Data until July 30. During a single operation, the government seized the records amount of 500,000 ammo rounds and 288 weapons, including AK-47 and AR-5 assault rifles. On the legislative side, a number of important laws have been enacted, such as the ones on national security and extinguishment of ownership, that's asset for future, aimed at laying the foundation for coordinating government action and disrupting the activities of criminal organizations. I would also like to share with you that in 2007, Mexico enacted the law to prevent and punish trafficking in person, which gathers aspects of prevention, prosecution, protection, and care for victims. Indeed, last June, an interagency commission was set up bringing together federal agencies, NGOs, and academics. This domestic agenda has borne fruit. However, Mexico could not deal with these issues without considering the transnational implication of criminal activities. In fact, we have developed a regional perspective of security issues against which we seek to embed a strategic view, enabling us to develop plans against transnational threats. Past experience and lessons learned so far prove that cooperation, communication, and assistance based upon co-responsibility is where the future lays. I don't want to forget, and I also want to finish, I don't want to bore you. Some data about the Merida Initiative. I'm talking a lot about the Merida, not just because I'm working on that, but I really think that it really marks a cornerstone on the relation in terms of bilateral agenda and organized crime. It has demanded a lot of courage for both sides. It demands a lot of political capital for a president of the United States to talk about provide money and technical resources to a country that has a long history of corruption between their institutions. And to make that during a war against terror, it's also a gain. It's something that has to be seen as as a compromise. On the Mexican side, to be talking about cooperate with the gringos, you know what does that mean? I mean, it's not easy, and it's less easy in Mexico City than here. You live here, you know that, you have a very good relation with your neighbors, you don't have a problem with that. And the Mexican side, neither. But in Mexico City, and between the politicians, if you want to be unpopular, then propose something to be cooperative and nice with the United States. It's really not easy. So this is something that has really faced President Calderon, and on certain time President Bush, and now President Obama. It's because the problem is so big that you have to face it, probably. But anyway, you really need a political perspective and seeing on the future. And the future of this region passed by development and not by organized crime. Passed by more trade, and more stronger communities, more strong cultural relation between both sides than by the drug trafficking or problems related with violence. Those are really the challenge faced by the region. And I can understand that on daily life, to be seeing what's going on in Juarez, to don't go anymore to Juarez as you used to make, or to other areas of the border, has really made a challenge. And where you, in the side of your country, and you cannot cross to the other side, there is a long distance to the north. So that creates isolation, and that creates isolation on both sides. And that's why I think that cooperation has to pass from these kind of programs that will provide some choppers and some flights and capacitation and all that. But it's not really the most important. The most important is really to create links between officials in both forces, but really, especially, to create the links on cooperation perspective on both sides that can really appeal to their capitals that the problem is not the border, that the problem is not specific questions with organized crimes, that the great challenge is what's the future of this region, and what do we have to make and face the problems right now that create a new perspective and a violent future for the border. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Minister Najera. And let's start with questions from the students. Are there questions, please?
Okay, it's on. Hi, my name is Silvia Costa. I'm a doctoral student. Bienvenidos at New Mexico State University. I have lots of questions, but I can only ask one, so I'm going to ask the one that's closest to my heart. You spoke about human rights, which is really important. Over the last 2 years, the rising violence in Juarez, I believe, has cast a shadow over the investigation of the hundreds of women that have been murdered in Juarez, which we refer to as femicide. Minister, my question to you is, how serious is the federal government taking this issue, and what initiatives are they taking to resolve and bring justice to those women that have been murdered and their families?
Thank you for your questions, and let me be as frank as possible on that. What's happening in Juarez, on my perspective, and I think it's a perspective shared with many other people, is something that we're living in Mexico and in many other countries. Is violence against a woman. Is a machista culture that prevails and that explains all kinds of legal and political decisions that at the end looks like, if it's a problem, that is not a huge problem. And I can understand and share your indignation with that. I think on a legal perspective that has been used by the politicians for many years on the cases of the Muertas de Juárez, is that these killings has been our responsibility to attend for local authorities. So the federal government, during the Fox administration, take out the responsibility very easy to say this is a local problem. So we're going to face it when we can put some of these killings on a federal perspective. That's a legal and right answer, but it's not an answer that provides any solution. During those years, imagine if we have to change all the police force in Juárez, and those were the police, the former police that were attending the cases on the first moment. You cannot trust on them. But it's not only, that doesn't mean that all those people were related with the killings or just covering the killings. That's what I said at the beginning. I think there is a lot of cultural questions there. Who cares? That's the first question for me. If we don't care for those killings, how can we be talking about other kind of values? But I think it's a very machista culture that has been there. Unfortunately, some of the main state politicians has making declarations on that sense during those years, during the years of the most strong figure of killings. I don't know exactly the data. I understand that some of the killings has been resolved. There is not a clear relation with one killer or two or three. That means there are not a clear relation between all the killings as an organized questions, as an organized situation. That's why I think it's a cultural attitude. To be killing poor woman in Mexico, in Juárez, has become like something you can make without problem and go away. And that shows how weak is the judiciary, how weak is our legal courts to attend those cases. And that shows that we cannot keep thinking against on drug trafficking. We cannot keep thinking on that just on police question, because if we don't have the judges or the legal circuit that can really deal with all the responsibilities, then to be a bad guy in Mexico looks like something that pays for. And this is something that has to be stopped. And when you see the size of the challenge, then there is a lot of work to do. And the results are going to arrive dropping in a very slow way and with a lot of insatisfaction for the society. And your question reflects that clearly, and I don't have a clear answer to provide you. I tried just to make an explanation of what's going on, and how complicated is the challenge, and how much effort needs from both sides, society and authorities. And as much as the media and as much as the society makes to work on this case, that will be, I think, the way to really change this cultural perspective that you can go to Juárez and kill a woman. Thank you.
So we'll take one more question from the student panel, and then we'll take questions from the audience, please.
Hi. My name is Erin Griffith, and you talked a lot about in your speech about the success of your war and the ability to replace the police that are very corrupt in these areas with a new police force that is no longer corrupt. Do you have efforts and initiatives in place to make that effort sustainable so that the new police force coming in does not become corrupted by the system that is there?
I don't have exactly the details on the Juárez police, but I will tell you what we're making on the federal police. The Mexican police members were not, they have not access to credit, so they cannot buy a house. They cannot provide a good level of life and a sure living for their families. So the change on the perspective and the construction of a new police means to provide them with the insurance, access to credit. They start to recruit people that have at least high school, and the people, there are right now 3,000 people right now studying on the police academy in San Luis Potosí, and the half of them has already a university degree. So they're really changing the professional profile of the people entering to the academy. Then there is a new level of salary, and that provides a very competitive level of entrance for the market, and a fast growing on the first years to keep a much more competitive level of growing of income related with other areas of the labor market. All these people pass through polygraphic exams and a huge group of exams that reflects social conditions, psychological profile, and professional one. The purpose is that all of the Mexican police members, being state, local, or federal, pass at least every 4 years a new battery of confidence exams. That means to have the capability to make around 100,000 exams of these every year. Until June of this year, this was mandatory for the federal police, but it was not for the local and the state. There's a new federal law that makes mandatory for state and local forces to pass these exams before going into the force, and then to pass it regularly. We're building, and with a lot of assistance on the Merida Initiative, to build the capabilities of these polygraphic exams. So it's nothing new. It's nothing new of what you're doing. It's absolutely new of what we're doing before.
I think we had a question here just a minute ago.
My name is Jackie Mitchell-Edwards. You mentioned several times that what's happening on the border is not a regional phenomenon, that you think that that is changing the face of the bilateral relationships between the United States and Mexico. Living on the border, the view of the border from El Paso is very different than the view of the border from Austin, is very different from the view of the border from DC. Likewise, in Mexico, the same exists. So what mechanisms do you think you have to put in place or will put in place to make sure that policy about the border is influenced by the view of the border, not just from the capitals, but also from the region and the states which grapple with the social, economic, and security problems? Thank you.
It's a very good question. Of course, I don't have a formula. There are the politics, mechanism of participation. There is a clear fact, which is the trade and the economic power growing here. I think that I mentioned at the beginning that many of these data that you know perfectly is not known inside our countries. I talk about these issues with some frequency in Mexico with American visitors from the military, legislative assistance, and it's amazing how few we know about each other. This is something you know perfectly, and I think that the first task is on both sides to really make understand the rest of their countries of what's going on here and how important is that. If we see from Mexico City, El Juarez, just thinking in El Paso, is because we don't see our own border. And if we think that the trade just crossed and is not necessarily created here, with all the production created in both sides of the border, then we inside the countries, we don't understand what's going on here. So I think you need more voices. I think you need to join Senator Domenici on the working, on the voicing loudspeaker, what's going on in the border. Because it's very easy to see just the criminal perspective, just the problems, or just the crossing, or just some historical facts, and that's it. So I think, I don't know how, but I think that the first step is that inside our countries, we don't know the border, and we don't understand what's going on here. And when someone talks about there is a great relationship between El Paso and Juarez, well, we think just because they're on the neighborhood. We don't understand how strong are those links, how, in terms of family, culture, and even not just trade. We don't understand that. How the people in Matamoros and Bronzeville, or Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, or Tijuana and San Diego are making their own living. And they don't care how much, what we're thinking in Mexico City or in Washington. I mean, you have to make your own living every day. So you cannot be waiting for the political decisions on the capitals. But it's so big, the border. It's so strong. It's so important in economic terms. And it's so important in terms of migration that a huge part of the future of the United States and Mexico is designed here. For you to be talking about cross-national questions is nothing new. For us, it's like a scholar activity. And I think the question is that we don't know on the rest of the country how important it is here. I several times make the comments that the people in Monterrey discovered that the United States was far away from San Antonio once the NAFTA was signed. People in Monterrey that has a very north view perspective, they just see the south of Texas. They don't see the United States. So imagine if those are the people that much more see in a creative way the United States, and they don't see the United States, they just only see the border. That shows you how much we have to learn each other from the other. And I think we're not working on that. We keep working on NAFTA, we create a good framework for trade, and we stop from other perspective. I don't know what's going to be the future. Living in Europe for a while, what you see is the European Union only exists in some blocks in Brussels. The rest of the Europeans doesn't think necessarily as a European, but they think less and less to be French, to be German, they think that they are from Bavaria, they're from the south of France, they're from Catalonia. They think regional. I think that the future of the European Union is much more regional on cultural terms and a union in political ones. I think this is something that probably will happen on the relation between Mexico and the United States. I'm not talking about a full integration, but I think that the communities creating right now specific cultural elements will create a new identity on both sides. And if on the capitals, the politicians, we keep out of that tendency, we will understand what's going on in our regions. That's how I see it.
Thank you. Senator Domenici, I think you had a question.
Mr. Minister, I just wanted to thank you personally, because I know these are difficult times, and for you to come in the midst of the problems you have is exceptional, and we want to be sure that you know that we know it. So it seems to me that the future of Mexico in terms of growth, jobs, is more tied to cities on the border in the future than ever before. And that maybe, if you look at it one way, a significant, far more of the growth in the future will be in the Laredos, the Juarez, in those areas, because the Chinese method of building plants is catching on there. I was invited by a big businessman, a friend of mine, and he said, I want to take you to Little China. And I said, where's that? And he said, Juarez. And they were building plants there at Chinese style, and I couldn't believe it. Having said that, obviously, so long as there are the assassinations and the fear that's there in such abundance, it seems that Mexico is going to lose this opportunity for this rather significant growth, and America is going to lose at the same time, because these border cities are going to be, border communities are going to have a lot of growth on American side too. So could you just, maybe you said it and I didn't get it, but give us your assessment of how the assassinations and the killings and the thing that's making life so dreadful and fearful, how is that coming along? Are things getting better? Is it going to take a long time? What's changing that gives you hope? Just a few of those concepts, please.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. The assassinations and killings are, unfortunately, the worst way to cover or to change the face of Juarez. If the face of Juarez was the killing of women, now it's changing to the killing of people. So it's a terrible one. When I mentioned before how this cartel has been changing and why the violence has become the way to deal their affairs between them, the analysis and the perception on the federal police, on the federal security minister, and on the military is that around 87% of the killings related with organized crime in Mexico are between people, members of different cartels. 10% are members of the police and military forces, and 2 to 3% are absolutely innocent people. 2 to 3% that has been killed by accident, by being in the wrong moment. Those are the official data. That doesn't, something that has been asked to the president several times, and quite frankly, he has not provided a satisfied answer, is that, but all of them are Mexicans. It doesn't matter if they are bad guys or good guys. All of them are Mexicans. We cannot be in a country that can have so many thousand people killed in unorganized crime situations every year. The analysis shows that there are still, sometimes, I cannot say if 1 year, 2 years, that a huge number of people are going to be killed. We've seen, this is an example I was mentioning yesterday in a conversation. You can see that to be a coyote, to be a pollero, no, was like a family tradition, no? Was like someone is a secretary, the other one works in the police, the other one works in an office, and someone else in the family works crossing people. That was very usual, no, in all the border. What we see now is that the people smuggling and trafficking people are not the traditional polleros from Ciudad Juárez or from Tijuana, are the people who are members of the gang, of the cartels, and who are changing their activities from narcotics to smuggling people, who are changing their people, their role to prostitution, to other kinds of organized crime, kidnapping, and other kinds of activities. This is something we've seen as long as the the activity to be drug traffickers has become less attractive, with more risk. So this implies more violence, the use of more violence from the drug cartels over their base people that are the ones that sells the drugs, and they are not providing so much money as before. So that's why it's so unpopular and not easy to be accepted, the phrase of our former general attorney that we were winning the war. If the way to show that we're winning is to have more killings, this is unsatisfactory, of course. But the analysis is that this figure will keep for a while, as long as we really can improve the capabilities of our local and state police forces. We have to, how to say that? Well, basically, you have to cut the links between local authorities or federal forces and the organized crime. You have to be moving people around the country to avoid, to create those links in terms of the federal forces. You have to restrain your army to other kind of activities, much with eradication, road controls, but not being in the cities. No, so it's a strategy. It will take still time, but it is very important that society keeps really seeing on that and asking for results and putting pressure, because if it's not on the bureaucracy, we will think that everything is all right. And we just see figures and showing where there are less killings than last month, so we're going well. And this is not going to result until we really arrive to really satisfaction for society. Thanks to you, Senator.
Thank you, Minister Counselor Najera. I want to tell you how much we appreciate your taking time to come here to New Mexico State University to the Domenici Conference to remind us that the strength of our partnership determines the ultimate result in resolving the issues of trade and the issues and the problems of drugs and other crime. I want to say thank you and to present you with a memento of this time that you spent with us. This is a tile prepared for us.
The preceding was a production of New Mexico State University. The views and opinions in this program are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the NMSU Board of Regents.